Jack Vance would be my number 2. My number 1 would be Gene Wolfe. Yeah, that's right.
Gene Wolfe. Okay, interesting. And were these like early discoveries for you, or did you come into them later on?
Yeah, they were pretty early. I was in high school, and I discovered Jack Vance first, and so I was going through a really wonderful Jack Vance jag phase of just reading everything, and then one day somebody said, "Wow, if you like the Dying Earth," because I was reading the Dying Earth, they say, "Well, if you like that, you really ought to check out this other guy, Gene Wolfe, and the Book of the New Sun." And I said, "Oh, all right." And well, so then I started reading Gene Wolfe, and I liked him even better than Jack Vance. So
So, I mean, you write in kind of this style, though, don't you? Kind of this action adventure 1910 science fiction serial deal.
yeah, sometimes I do that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's where I know you from, specifically that type of writing. And it's it's interesting, is it not? I mean, are there other people kind of capture that feeling from the turn of the century?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm always on the lookout for stuff, and I end up diving. I think a lot of the time, one's own reading taste is you're just looking for something that you really like, and you get kind of searching here and searching there, and
Yeah.
so yeah, I find some stuff like some really old stuff that's just really like wow. And then I start reading that for a while. So yeah, it's but yeah, mostly it does tend to be a lot of the older stuff really. So yeah.
Well, tell me, if you had to break it apart, what is it exactly that older stuff is to you as both an author of it? And I mean, we got to stop calling it older stuff. I mean, you're kind of capturing it in a modern setting, aren't you?
Yeah, well, just to recapture that sense of adventure and um, yeah, action. I mean, it's kind of got that pulp sensibility
Yeah.
sometimes, and
Because you're not
you
dealing with
know,
science too much, are you? I mean, you're not really like putting hardcore science behind the stories.
right, right. I mean, sometimes, right. It depends on what it is. Where I'm trying to work within the boundaries that they've kind of set up.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah.
what are those boundaries? I mean, what are the boundaries that are kind of set up in this type of fiction?
Well, if what you're working on is like you say, if it's essentially a period piece, so if you're writing something that is plausibly from the 1920s or whatever, then you're working within what they knew at the time and what they fantasized might be, what their theories about how things
Yeah.
might be. So
But I mean, the things, the archetypes are there though throughout all of them, the pulp stuff, and even today. I mean, you're writing the same kind of arcs, right? The same kind of characters. I mean, that's just kind
right.
of floats these stories, right? I mean, is that why you turn into them because of the characters and the action, more or less, than obviously not the setting because we know that's inaccurate at this point.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, and sometimes for me, it's also just kind of a literary playing around with things to say like, what if, what
Yeah,
if
right. Yeah,
Edgar
I
Rice
love it.
Burroughs
I love it
wrote,
for that right there alone because you have stuff like what is it? Abraham Lincoln's Vampire Hunter, right? Or
right.
what is it? Wuthering Heights and Zombies. I can't remember what they called that
Yeah,
one.
exactly, exactly. Yeah,
But these mashups are amazing. Even Captain America, if you follow like the MCU, Captain America followed like the spy caper arc or whatnot. These blendings of things are really taking off lately.
that's true. That is true.
And I mean, I appreciate what those serials were trying to accomplish. I mean, westerns too, right? I mean, there was all types of fiction like that. So you're not alone in writing this stuff, and you're not alone in enjoying this stuff either. I mean, you're writing for an audience, correct? For the with the Jack Vance compendiums or whatnot, the encyclopedias, dictionaries.
Right, right. And the Gene Wolfe books too. Yes, that's right.
I mean, is it really small niche? You have to dig, 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 or are you guys a community talking and communicating back and forth about things? I mean, because honestly, if I was reading a Jack Vance novel and some random person walked up to me on the street and said, "Yo, dude, I know somebody else that you might like," I'd probably run away. I don't like I don't like strangers interacting with me. So you had to have known this person prior to even going into that interaction, right?
Oh, you're talking about just way back when I got that initial. Well,
Spark,
that's
yeah.
just yeah. Well, that was actually, that's just at the bookstore. You're just prowling around at the used bookstore, and
Oh, I see.
they've seen you around, and you start talking about things that you like. So the context, yeah, that was the context of people who had been reading a lot of stuff, and they just kind of go, oh, well, if you like this, then maybe you'd like that. And like you say, at first I just kind of like, all right, I just kind of filed it away. But then as I started looking into it, it was like, wow. So, and that's, again, like I was saying before, that we spend so much of our time, you know we're like prospectors. You're out
Yeah.
there just trying to find a good vein. You're trying to find something, that just gives you that jolt that you
That
want.
jolt, man, that's what it is, right? That's what you're looking for. You want to put your tongue on the 9-volt battery and feel
Exactly.
it. Yeah. And if it involves like 1910 serial science fiction mixed with what you know of, I mean, you're mixed. I mean, you have a literary theory going into this, correct? You have taken classes and all that good stuff going into the writing of the fiction.
Right.
So I don't even think the guys in the 1910s had what we know now today, right?
Right. Right.
I mean, have you broken them apart and kind of studied what they were doing and then mimic that exactly in plot and character development? I mean, or are you using the modern stuff to kind of
Yeah.
work that
Yeah.
old stuff?
Yeah. Exactly. So in a case where I wanted to work, Edgar Rice Burroughs, the guy who created Tarzan, and he created John Carter of Mars. And so I was looking at that, and he was a huge seller, and
Yeah.
he made lots of money, and what a profound influence he had on our culture, such that everybody knows Tarzan.
Yep.
um, and he also, because of his presence, he really did shape genre of science fiction. um, but he's got that pulp thing going on, the same kind of
Yeah.
drive
Serial.
that you yeah,
This
yeah.
endless
And
story that never dies, basically.
yeah, yeah. And so there are certain structures and forms, and so yeah, I do study it a lot. But I as usual, I try to mostly read the stuff that I actually enjoy. So, but I did surprisingly, I've now read just about everything by Edgar Rice Burroughs, which is weird. I didn't
That's
think that it would.
interesting.
I didn't think it would turn into quite that, but and I have my favorites and my least favorites. But
I've developed like
so,
3 questions I want to ask you. Well, I
wow,
mean, number one being the egocentrism, right? Because you can't read like an Edgar Rice Burroughs and not be like blown away by the absolute and utter vulgarity of the racism, right? I mean, the place of the white man in that world is like so strong and hardcore that, I mean, that's right, punching you in the face, basically. Not to labor the whole thing.
the thing of it, well, I guess a lot of that would be like the Tarzan series, and I
Yeah,
admit that I don't actually like the Tarzan series. For stories set in Africa, I prefer other people who actually had some experience in Africa. So yeah, that's the Tarzan series. I don't. I've only read one or two of those. Yeah, I don't really like those. So that's true. I
I
have
just
to. I have
dabbled in the
to.
very beginning of the first one.
Yeah,
Obviously,
yeah,
I'm an American, so I've been,
yeah.
drowning in
No,
Tarzan lore my entire life. But
yeah,
I read
yeah,
the beginning of that book and I was like, Jesus, this is horrible. This is
yeah,
really bad. Not
yeah,
right. The writing was fine. The writing was really well done, but in terms of just the absolute racism that was evident there,
yeah,
you
yeah.
can't get rid of that. I mean, it dates you, right? I mean, it's unfortunate. It poisons the experience in a way.
Well, I mean, and if
Or does it?
since
I
the
don't
thing
know.
is that neither one of us likes that particular thing, but
Yeah,
if you did like it, you could honestly say, well, it was a product of its time. In other
could.
words, that at the time that wasn't considered so, out
I
there.
appreciate history, absolutely, 100%. And I appreciate Edgar Rice Burroughs' place in our history as authors. You can't avoid it. But it does flavor the reading, right? I mean, you just have to take
Yeah,
out a bit
yeah,
of the appreciation when you get to that part, I think.
yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's a conversation at present when you talk about like, uh, I don't know, let's throw like some gasoline on the fire, the hashtag Me Too movement. When you talk about that guy, what's his name, Weinstein, and how he's going to have a legacy in Hollywood for a long time. You know, he's won Academy Awards. You can't look at the history of the Academy Awards without seeing his name or watch clips without seeing his face, right? So, I
Right.
mean,
Right.
Edgar Rice Burroughs, kind of that opinion is always going to be attached and flavored to those achievements, I guess, if it makes sense what I'm trying to say.
No, no, it does. It does. But and that's the thing is, yeah, the different waves of subsequent generations and how they interpret or
Interpret it, yeah.
reinterpret. Yeah. So yeah, here's a case where it the tide shifted on him while he was kind of still active,
Still alive, yeah.
whereas we're talking now about Edgar Rice Burroughs writing at a time when the Ku Klux Klan was
Yeah.
suddenly revived because of a movie. This is interesting to point out the kind of Hollywood connection. The Ku Klux Klan had kind of died out and wasn't really doing much, but then this blockbuster, and again, this is a milestone movie, Birth of a Nation,
Oh, okay.
and suddenly everybody was into it, and the Klan had a revival. Now, that's a really weird thing right there. Um, so, you
I
know,
mean, we're talking
if we
about
look at,
disenfranchised people, right? Honestly, looking for a definition or a place to be, I guess. I don't know. Hard life, that era, right? I mean, we're talking, when was Birth of a Nation? That was a silent film, wasn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So I mean, that's, I don't know, 19, what was it? 1915, 1920?
yeah, somewhere around in there.
I mean, people are hurting. I mean, God, I can't even imagine living in that era now, giving up all the luxury that I have, all the comforts. I mean, God, the
Right,
South
but so
was
that's
devastated 50 years after the war. I mean, that's nothing. That's almost
that's
my life.
the situation that they were in. That was the culture at the time, and that movie, you know, so it's hard for us contemporary people to watch that movie as an art form that it is,
Yeah.
and divest from the repugnant text of it, because it's kind of tough, you know. So it's kind of like watching, you know, Triumph of Will, the Lani Riefstoff film about the rise of Hitler, where there's no question that the film is artistically devastatingly beautiful, but it's just so abhorrent, you know. So anyway,
The subject matter, anyway.
yeah, yeah,
And subject matter can be abhorrent. I mean, wasn't there there was the painting of the Virgin Mary done in elephant manure or something along those lines when I was a kid. It had a beautiful subject, but the materials that were used to make it were disgusting. I mean, it's a very interesting kind of juxtaposition of what we're talking about. The subject is kind of disgusting, but the materials used to make it are stunning. And unfortunately, it destroys the person who makes it, doesn't it? I mean, it kind of stains them in a way. John Carter isn't really able to make it to the big screen because they have to lie too much about the construction of those stories, right? I mean, that
hmm.
character is no longer a Confederate soldier or whatnot. He's something else, isn't he?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. I thought I was very
I
skeptical.
tried to watch that movie and I couldn't get to it. So
Oh,
I'm at,
really?
yeah, I could not get into it. There was a
Oh, I
score, the
guess.
music just really pulled me out in a negative
Oh,
way.
I was very skeptical of it from the beginning, but when I actually went and saw it, I was pleasantly surprised. I thought, but you know, there you go. I mean, and the box office, it didn't work out. But I thought they threaded that particular needle fairly well. But
I have to force myself to watch, is what you're saying.
no, 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 no. Actually, I'm of the opposite camp. I mean, if it doesn't draw you in, you shouldn't. I don't think you should, you know, force yourself to read or watch anything. I don't like that kind of thing.
I love getting sucked into something and you can't put it down. That's the search, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
You
right.
put you put something in the microwave, not the microwave. You put something in the DVD player or something. You just want to be sucked into it. And it's so
Right.
disappointing when you are not. And that's what we try to do, isn't it? We try to weave that magic, try to suck people in. make it happen. Do you think you've done it? Do you think you've made the magic happen? People get sucked into your fiction,
I hope so. I
right?
certainly hope so. I mean, like we say, on these reference books that I've done, I've
Yeah.
gotten all sorts of great feedback from people that I've helped them to unlock or unpack some of the denser material, and it's really helped them to appreciate the thing that they already liked. So but that's the
How does
problem
that
is,
work? How does making one of those things work? Like when you're putting those, I mean, they're dense, right? I mean, they're not,
well,
you're
some of
breaking
them
apart
are.
like a mythology, not a mythology, you're breaking apart like a world building. You're doing the opposite.
Yeah, 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 that's right. I mean, each one is a little different. I mean, the Jack Vance book is really a case of, that one was well, finding all the different stars and planets and just that kind of a thing, and mapping them out, and because he used a lot of real stars and everything, so it's kind of fun to trace that all out. And so that one actually, that
That's
one as
cool.
far
So
as
can you look
as
up
far
into,
as
I mean, his fiction obviously is based on reality, but you can look up into the sky and say, this story happened around that star.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
cool.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's why that's what that one was. But that one involved that one. It's not a very big book, but for that one, I did have to go through pretty much all of his fiction just with a comb, looking for those details.
Yeah,
So
that's the part that gets me, is the attention to detail that you would have to have if you're going to call the book what it is. You're going to
right,
have to read all those books. I mean, you're going to have to
right,
break them apart.
right,
And
right.
that's so arduous. I mean, as somebody who writes, is like, I can't imagine spending my time doing that. Were you writing fiction at the same time?
Yeah, yeah, but not as much. I mean, that's the thing, and you probably know the allure of research. You can really get drawn into just doing any kind of research if it catches your attention. So it kind of feeds into that. But yeah, so I mean, I started off with the Gene Wolfe book, and that was a case where I just I really admired the vocabulary. It just seemed so unique, and yet he wasn't using any made up words. And
Yeah.
so I thought, wow, that's really, and as I started looking at it more and more, um, I thought, hey, there should be a guidebook for this. And I waited a couple of years for somebody else to do it, because it just seemed so natural.
Yeah.
And then and then it wasn't happening, so I finally wrote him a letter, and
Jack
asked him, and
Vance?
no, no, Gene
Oh,
Wolfe.
oh, he was still alive at that time?
Yeah, yeah. And so, in fact, Gene Wolfe is still alive now.
Is he? I didn't even
Um,
look him up before I got on the
it's all right.
call
It's
with
all
you.
right. In fact, yeah, Jack Vance only died a couple years ago. He lived a long time. But anyway, I wrote to Gene Wolfe,
96 years old in Oakland. I did look him up. Just
oh, okay,
look
yeah, yeah,
at
yeah,
him.
yeah. Anyway, so I wrote to Gene Wolfe and said, hey, if is anybody doing this project? If not, I'd like to do it. And he said, nobody's doing it, so go ahead. So I said, well, all right. So that was that one. But
So
yeah,
these gentlemen just died in the 21st century. No, I'm sorry, Gene Wolfe is still alive. So obviously their work is still in copyright,
right, right.
but they have this whole universe of material. Are they still writing? Is he still writing? This is
Gene
fascinating.
Wolfe
He's
is
87 years old. He lives in New York City. I have no clue where he lives, but he
no,
was
he
born in New
lives
York City,
over in Illinois.
Illinois. Okay. Does he still write?
Yes, he's working on a novel, a sequel right now.
Borrowed Man, that 2015 was his last work, and he's got another work coming.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
do
a
you
sequel
find
to
your?
the,
Go ahead.
it's a sequel to that one.
Oh, interesting. I mean, do you find yourself thinking about what life would be like nearing your 90s and still being a writer and having to work those keys? I mean, I, it's interesting that he's still doing it.
Yeah, yeah, it is. We don't know how much longer it'll last. So, for the fans, we're just happy to, each one is such a gift, really.
Yeah. Harlan Ellison, I think that was the gentleman's name, just died. He wrote a book, was published right before his death. It's like, I guess you're done, huh? I mean, finish your last work. Hopefully he didn't start something else, and it's the best way to finish it.
Yeah, and that's an interesting case because he was pretty instrumental in Gene Wolfe and his career. So it's very sad to see Harlan Ellison pass away.
It's very
Yeah.
interesting. I mean, my exploration of science fiction just started a year ago, honestly, like this. I mean, I didn't know this whole world existed until I started having conversations with hardcore science fiction fans. I mean, but you discovered this in the old bookstores back in the day. I mean, how did I miss this? I don't understand how it's so big and so vast and so amazing, and yet it doesn't trickle into, I don't know, mainstream society or whatnot.
Yeah, that's weird. I mean, it's like that, that saying, maybe it was Damon Knight who said, because everybody always talks about the golden age of science fiction, and Damon Knight said, yeah, the golden age of science fiction is 12. In other words, it was the 12
When
year
you're
old.
reading it, right?
Yeah.
When
So
you're
you're
just
right, but just that's when it happened for them. Like you're like 12 years old, and you get the weird tales or astounding stories at the magazine rack, and you start reading it, and you get that jolt, and it just gets you, and you just start reading more and more of it, and it's like that.
did it get passed down to you from somebody older too? Do you have somebody of an influence writing or reading that type of stuff as well?
I don't know. I mean, I think it was probably, I mean, I was watching, the first run of Star Trek on TV and stuff. So I mean, I was a little kid, but and the Apollo missions are going on and everything, and it just seemed
Yeah.
like all
Oh
this
wow.
all this stuff is going on, and so it was just there, but then as I kept going, and then yeah, I must have been, I don't know, 12 or 13 when I did actually start reading the John Carter books, and I just thought that was pretty cool. And then yeah, and
It's
then
perfect
started
age,
reading.
right? I mean, you have the ladies in there.
Yeah. Well, that's the funny thing though, because as a kid, I felt kind of like, oh man, this whole formula, like always saving the damsel in distress. You're just kind of like, because you're not, when you're younger, you're just not that much interested in that.
Yeah.
At least I wasn't. But now I have a greater appreciation for how that does, like we're saying, that is archetypal. That is part of the force and power of what he's doing, is the damsel in distress, or the love interest, who then he ends up marrying. So it's not just like a James Bond sort of cavalier attitude or something. So yeah.
It's so difficult to get back into that stuff too now. You're right, the golden age being 12. I mean, it's as an adult trying to read that work is like education. It's like trying to learn something like a language. It
Yeah.
just doesn't work, right? I mean, it's
No,
really
no, I hear you.
uncomfortable.
I hear you, and that's why I say, just, if it, don't force it. I mean, hopefully, if you can just find the stuff that'll give you the joy, um, and hopefully it'll give you the joy, but you look at that and go, wow, that's really neat. And maybe if it were done in a more contemporary way, start your juices, your creativity flowing in that way, of how you can capture that essence, and bring it up to your own time or whatever.
So obviously you start from a place of love. You love the material. How do you end up where you go though? You sit down, let's talk about fiction. You sit down, you want to work with this canvas, right? Or these materials. How does that function for you? Does it just come out? Or do you have to
Yeah,
plan the
yeah, no,
living
that's
hell out of it?
right. And I guess that's the thing. It's like the division between my reference side and my
Yeah.
actual creative side.
Because you
Um,
have like an entirely structured knowledge of the subject that I guess you can pull from at will.
right, right. Yeah, well, I mean, each story, like if we're just talking about stories, each one has a different kind of thing. Sometimes it's a literary kind of conceit, like, well, what if you took this and you did it that way? What if you go like this or that? They do tend to have a dark kind of a dark kind of side. In fact, maybe they end up often being almost horror stories, really. I don't know.
Well, yeah,
But
well, definitely science fiction and horror are kissing cousins, right? I mean, they
yeah,
definitely
yeah,
touch and fond all over the place.
yeah, that's right.
Um,
So here was a case where um, I had I had read Marcel Proust. I read the whole book, the whole big series, and it was interesting. And I thought, well, what if you took that, you know, French uh, end of the century kind of Belle Epoque, you know, beautiful world of France before World War One, and you translate that into hard boiled. It's like, what would that be like? I mean, it's kind of like an
Interesting.
opposite. And
Hard
so
boiled
that's
as
when,
in like detective, as in
yeah, yeah,
like the noir that was coming out at that time, right?
exactly right, exactly right. And so then I wrote that. That was one called Hard Boiled Proust. So that's how I did that one.
You use the author's name. I'm not really very familiar with Proust. I'm looking him up right now. And I don't know French very well, so obviously I didn't even come close to how to spell it.
Yeah, no, it's all right. Yeah, Proust.
Proust. See, it doesn't make any sense. I
Yeah,
think the whole language was developed just to troll humanity.
that's right. Exactly right.
Honestly, do you speak French?
No, I don't.
Okay, so you're reading translations.
Yes, yes.
How do you feel about translations? I mean, personally, not to trap you or anything, I don't like them because I don't think they capture the author's voice necessarily,
Interesting.
right?
Interesting.
Because there's somebody else's voice. But some people say if you get a really good translator, they can be phenomenal. But I've talked to Italian authors who have their work translated into English, and they say that they don't. It doesn't work. These people, they know English, they know Italian, they know English, they mix them together, and the intention from Italian to English is just not there. But I
Huh.
wonder, Italian's very specific. I mean, you have what, hundreds and hundreds of dialects. Like you can go from someplace in the south to the north,
Yeah.
and they cannot communicate. It's
Yeah,
a
that's
totally different language.
exactly
So
right.
I don't understand how somebody can go in and say, okay, little guy from this Peruvian town or Parisian town or whatever, I'm going to translate your language somehow perfectly.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
just don't trust it. So now that I've given you a monologue on it and convinced you, what do you think?
Well, I understand the difficulty, but actually, I read a lot of things in translation.
Okay.
I've read a lot of Russian things in English translation. In fact, some of my favorite, there's a Russian book called Roadside Picnic, which is a science fiction-y thing. And
Oh, is that has a Polish author, right?
no,
Um,
they're
oh,
Russian. The Polish one, that guy is Lem. He's
yeah.
often, yeah, we often think of him. But the brothers who wrote Roadside
Oh,
Picnic,
it's the other guys. Okay.
Strugowski brothers.
Okay.
Yeah,
They trickled through. There's a very small number of Russian authors that trickled through
yeah, that's
that,
right.
that
So
Iron Curtain.
there's a case where I've read that one in two different translations, and I actually
Okay.
like both of them for different reasons.
Oh,
So
interesting. They weren't the same book.
it's the same book, but the earliest translation was from the 70s, and it was a it was kind of a censored text, and so
Oh,
that's
interesting.
why the more recent one is a more complete text. But um, I'm so fond of certain forms that they used in the earlier translation that when the new translator she uses a different um, mode or a different technique, and I kind of prefer some of the earlier. It's like that kind of thing. I mostly like the new translation for the new material that was cut out, that was abridged by the Soviet censors in the first version. But um, but some of the naming conventions and some of the slang that was used in the earlier translation, it has a more gangstery feel or a
Oh,
more
really interesting.
Yeah,
Because
or
I'm
more.
wondering because you work now with more educated people, right? This woman probably got an education to translate. She knows every word in Russian. She knows all of the whatever the hells. But the person in the 70s probably got taught Russian by their grandfather or something. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
there's that going on. Yeah. And also, I mean, sympathy for the translator, because I mean, I did write an email to the new translator to just say, hey, that's really great job, thanks. Um, but I also pointed out that because of my own, I had read it before, and so I did like these little things, and I just meant it for sharing information, just to say, hey, I'm a big fan of that novel, and I think you've done a really great job. But having done that, I suddenly felt like, oh no, it's that terrible thing where if there's anything good, it's all due to the original author. If there's anything bad, you blame it on the translator. You see what I mean? So
Yeah.
here I was just trying to praise her, but inadvertently, because that's the kind of tar pit you get into in this kind of thing. So
They're
I have
not
a
they're not really performing an artistry, are they? They're performing more of a trade.
it's
The
tricky
original
that way.
author was an artist, putting the words out there, but they are just looking for the actual meaning behind what they put on paper. In a way, they're just acting like an editor, maybe. I don't know. I just can't get
Yeah,
into it. I just have this
yeah,
distracting little thing in the back of my head. What are you reading? Are you reading the translator or are you reading Tolstoy? Which one? Which one's it
yeah,
going to be?
exactly.
Because sometimes I
Yeah,
wonder about Shakespeare too, or Beowulf, or any of that stuff gets kind
sure.
of pushed along generation after generation,
Right.
slowly morphed into a more understandable version of itself or whatnot. Yeah, we definitely experienced that with Shakespeare. They modernized a bunch of that. I wonder going into the future, will somebody watch Macbeth and see, Roman Polanski immediately in their mind, or will they see the words on paper? You know what I mean?
Ah, uh-huh, uh-huh.
Translations, I mean, I guess it all depends where you are in time. And here we are with this. I mean, what do you call this fiction that you write? Specifically, this type of 1910 science fiction serial stuff. Does it have a name? Or if you had to give yourself a title like I am this type of author, what would it be?
Gee, I don't know. I just tend to think of it as being just science fiction, really.
To science
or
fiction?
maybe or maybe fantasy, because like you say, if the science isn't that strong, then people feel like it's a more fantasy kind of thing.
Sword and laser kind of situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting because they could say the same thing about Star Trek. And Star Trek is what pulled me. I'm on the periphery of the whole genre that you're swimming mightily in, but that's what started. I mean, that's what crossed the boundary, isn't it?
Yeah, 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 it
Made it
really.
kind of accessible.
Yeah, and it's interesting to look at the roots of that, because I think that one of the strong roots for that was the movie Forbidden Planet, and it's
Oh,
it's a
really?
it's a real it's a real kick. That it really kicked to just watch Forbidden Planet and see, wow.
Who's in that? The only reason I even know that name is because I think Stephen King wrote about that poster covering the hole in the wall in Shawshank,
Oh,
and there was
probably
a pinup
so.
girl on it, and I can't remember the name of the girl.
Oh
Wasn't it?
yeah,
Was there a girl in
maybe.
that movie?
Well, yeah, there's definitely Anne Francis is in
Yeah,
that
there you go.
movie, but it's also Leslie Nielsen is the
Is the guy.
starship captain.
You can get in the movies a lot easier than you can the books, unfortunately, I think. I'm gonna have to explore that. I am not finishing any books I start now. It's just I start them 30, 40 pages into it, and then something else comes along. So I'm like ADD when it comes to literature. Cannot continue reading something.
But that's fine, because if you can walk away from it, then you probably should. I mean,
A
unless it's
desperate
something
search.
unless you have to read it for a course, or some other thing like
Friend or
that,
whatnot.
then
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, yeah, I guess I can set my, happy butt down and finish a book if I force myself to. I'm just so curious about beginnings, how people pull the readers into their work. It's such a delicate art form. Man, that first sentence is so freaking important. It's in first page, first chapter, right? I mean, when do you stop reading a book?
Yeah, right. That's a good point. Yeah, that's right.
When does it go down? Because then you don't think about it anymore. It's a bad book. You don't pick it up again. And then what makes a bad book? There's the interesting what was it called? The Name of the Wind. You probably didn't read it. It's a fantasy story by Patrick Rufus or something like that. Could not get into it for the longest time. And then one day just clicked, read all the way through it. So maybe it's just I have to get to a point where my twins aren't anywhere near me when I start a book, and I'll enjoy them more.
Well, it's interesting, and it is a weird thing where sometimes, yeah, the timing is just not right, or
Never write. I mean, you have to wake up and write. When do you read? and drips and drabs whenever you can. So I don't know. It's interesting. What's coming up for you? I mean, like, what do you have on the horizon in terms of your future?
Well, at the moment, I'm working on I have all these. I've just done a bunch of collections of my stories in paperback form, so I'm kind of
Oh
shifting
yeah,
over. I'm
I
shifting over
saw
to
that you were collecting 3
promoting them.
stories in one volume, and
Yeah,
turning
yeah,
up 24,000 words or something along those lines, a short novella. I was
yeah.
thinking about the exact same thing. I wanted to pick your brain about that. My idea is to throw 3 time travel stories that may loosely connect into one volume and then publishing that. How are you finding the reception to your I don't know what you would call that, your 3-volume or three short story collection?
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I say, now I have to work on the promotional side of it. So, so yeah, things are kind of quiet at the moment. But so yeah, that was one of them. That's called the Jizmatic Trilogy,
Hmm.
and then I have some collections of short stories. Like there's the one Old Flames Burn Manvi, and then there's Doomsday and Other Tours, and then there's Fallout Stories. So I'm kind of focusing on the promotional side and pushing these. I mean, I'm still writing other things at the same time, but that's become the new main thrust of establishing my paperback empire of
So I mean, honestly, art, right? Art on these books has got to mimic those old serials in a way, right? I mean, rockets that don't make sense, physics that don't make sense, people walking around with fish bowls on their head or whatnot. I mean, that is like such an integral part to it. But can you find people to help you duplicate that, or is that something that you're even, considering? The
Interesting
cover art
point.
of your books, yeah, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
when I mean, I love that stuff. I just want to stare at it because it's so. I mean, what word am I looking for? Stylized, yes, but it's so simple. Like, hey, I want to live in space, and this is the way I want it to work.
Yeah,
I
that's
love it.
right.
I love it. It's
That's
magic.
right. Yeah.
That's the fantasy element, isn't it? Nothing makes sense in terms of science. But I mean, yeah, right. Do you want to go that far with it?
Well, like I say, at this point, I just have to, the production side is now over, and so now I just shift over to the promotional side and go like that. So
Yeah.
it's you have to wear the different hats at the different times, and now it's the time for that. So,
Well, tell me about your
but
marketing hat. I mean, I have no clue how to market anything. People say that you just have to have like a Twitter account and put content up, and eventually it'll rain followers or whatever. Do you have a strategy? I mean, do you want to share it?
it is pretty much new territory, so I don't really have
Right?
much to share at the moment. I kind of thought that there would be more bleed over from the people that like my reference books, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of that
Different type of
happening.
writing, right?
Yeah, it's a different type of thing. So I kind of understand that, but also it might be the case that they just don't know about it. Like,
Yeah.
if
Who are those
they,
people, right? They obviously love what you love,
yeah,
right? They want to read
exactly.
what you're writing. How do you get
Yeah,
your stuff to
right.
them?
Right, right. So I'm
I mean, they'll
exactly
buy from
these
you if
are.
you write another reference book, right? But how do you get
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right.
how do you get your
And so
fiction
that's
into
why
their
I'm
hands? I mean, that's
right.
my
So
ultimate the question. Because I mean, you could really annoy people and they won't ever look at you. And what you really need, in my opinion, what you need are reviews on Amazon and somebody telling people in real life to read your book under threat of something, boredom or physical pain, right? I mean, I don't know.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So it's about getting the information out there so that people who've never heard of me will be interested, and people who have heard of me will go, "Oh, it's that guy. Oh, now what is he doing?" And like you
Yeah,
say, getting copies out there so that people can read them
enjoy them.
and share them, or even
I
take
have
them to
bought
the
so
used
many books
bookstore.
because somebody in some thread said you have to read this because you're interested in the subject, right?
Exactly.
That
Exactly.
we live in an age of discovery. We live,
Yeah.
and we are. We they don't they call it the age of discovery now?
They
I'm
should.
I'm selling it, man. I heard that recently. I totally agree with it. We're in the age of discovery. All day long, I'm on Twitter, right? And I scroll down and I scroll down and I scroll down. Then I'm, oh, damn, that's interesting. Click. And then I'm in an article and I'm reading that and I click on something else and I read that. And then in the comments or something else and there's a book. You know what I mean? 5 clicks and there's a book that I have to read. I
There you
love that.
go.
And I think the key to marketing going forward is how to plant that shit, make all of your books
Yeah.
show up in the right thread at the right time in the right
Yeah.
place.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. So I'm pushing into Goodreads. I already have a certain presence on Amazon, but I need to expand that. So yeah, I'm getting into over there at Goodreads. I'm doing some, book giveaways and that kind of thing. And
You do
yeah,
anthologies too, right? You submit short fiction to other people's publications. Did I see?
right, right.
Yeah, I think that's a good
Magazines
way
and
to go about things too.
anthologies.
Because
Yeah, yeah,
obviously you
that's
need to go
right.
where readers are, and you can't submit work to the library necessarily. I don't think. How does that work exactly?
Yeah, no, it doesn't really work like that. You're right.
Submit for approval to the county of
Yeah,
like I don't know where in New York City.
yeah,
I
that's right. Yeah,
don't
so I
know.
have some projects. Like often is the case, that you have a couple of things that are have been sold at a place, but they haven't come out yet. So, and other things where, you wonder if that particular venue is under stress and might not even come around or whatever. So
Yeah,
so there's a couple things like that. But those are, like we're saying, those are cases that it's beyond my control, as opposed to the stuff that I've assembled myself. And then I'm also in charge of the promotion and trying to drum up reviews, because exactly like you say, that is so important, because it is through the personal
experience of reading a book, right? And
experience and
passing
the
it on.
relations that
Yeah,
other people have with each other, where even a person,
yeah,
like we're saying, a person who reads it and doesn't like it, but they might say, "Oh, I know somebody who would like this," and they just give them the book or something. I mean, just
yeah.
so
Great
so
example of that's Harry Potter, right? That was such a social phenomenon, how that kind of caught on.
yeah,
It
yeah,
wasn't like you were looking for a good book and you picked it up. Somebody told you how good it was and you picked it up. And
right,
then it just spread.
right,
And the experience of buying it, you're searching for it, you're standing in line,
right,
I mean, it was just like people want to feel a connection. And you would think that reading is a very solitary thing, but it's kind of not. It's you and the reader. And it's you and the reader and anybody else they think that might enjoy that book, whoever, they put in the place of the characters or whatever.
right,
That's
right.
where the marketing happens. I mean, I just can't think of anybody who tried to sell me their book and I went, I'm going to buy that right now, unless I know them, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I am, but that's the hardest part, getting out there and doing something. I mean, do you consider yourself an indie or a traditionally published author? Because you do have a publisher for a lot of your work, right?
Oh, no, no, it is all me.
Oh,
All of it's me.
oh man, what was the name of the publisher? What's the name of your publishing company?
Serious fiction.
Yeah, I love the name. I think
Thank
that's
you.
really neat.
Thank
I
you.
looked you up. I mean, straight up legit, right? I mean, your website looks good. Um, and you have separated yourself from a lot of the indie authors by having that one little thing there, right? A lot of them
Well,
don't
thank
have
you.
that, right? But then you take on I mean, you're a writer first and foremost, right? You're a fan before that, but now you've put on the hat of a publisher. And do you like the way that fits, or is it uncomfortable? Because I hate it, honestly. I don't like being a publisher because it does come with that like marketing aspect to it.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty tricky, and you do start getting into one of those sort of situations where you feel like, oh no, if I'm doing this, that means I have less time for the writing, or
Right?
whatever. It starts to
Well, I mean,
seem like it's
obviously you're structured, right? You have to write a certain number of words, or you have a writing period, and then the rest of the day you can, publish podcasts or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah, that's right. That's the strategy for success. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I mean, I wish. I wake up in the morning and I do try to write as much as I possibly can, but I am totally distracted by all the social media pulling my attention this way and that. The age of discovery is not only a blessing but a curse, man. It's like it just wants your attention diverted from what you're supposed to be doing.
Age of distraction.
Yeah, the age of distraction. Oh man, the double D's. We'll just call it the age of the double D's. History won't know what to do with us. I mean, we've got all this free porn, and we're the age of the double D's. They're gonna think they're.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Oh man. So you are writing stuff right now. You're in the marketing stage, and you hate it, and it's horrible, and you're gonna
Yep.
get through it. I mean, honestly, that's all it is just making connections, being personable, having conversations like this with people. I think is very, very important. Getting stuff out there,
Absolutely, and that's why
right?
I am so blessed by your reaching out to me. I mean, I don't even know how you knew to contact me, what vector you came in by, but
I
I'm so
came in by
happy.
loving that art, honestly. I came in by loving that old science fiction art, and I think I
Okay,
discovered you that way.
all
I
right,
don't know I don't know how exactly, but I
excellent,
mean that's where my avenue of approach came from. You never know
excellent.
exactly,
Thank you
right?
very
I
much.
through
Well,
this podcast, and it's only to have a discussion. Honestly, I look for people that I find interesting that I want to talk to,
all right.
and the cool ones say yes, and the other ones don't say anything at all normally. But I've had the opportunity to speak with Daniel Abrams, the guy who does The Expanse. Well, 50% of The
Right,
Expanse.
right. I saw that. That must have been pretty fun.
Man,
I
that
mean,
was
for
fan.
you.
Leading up to it, my wife did not appreciate it very much because I was nervous as hell. But having the conversation was great. If you listen to it, he actually talked about the meditative, properties of reading and how you're
Uh-huh.
basically just guiding people along,
Yeah,
giving them
yeah,
ideas to play with in their imagination.
yeah.
And I mean, that's powerful if you can make that work for you. And I guess that dude has him and his buddy. I've read the first book of The Expanse, and I watched the first season of the Expanse, and I thought they were well done, right? I mean, that's hardcore science fiction that does good things.
Did you feel there was it a good adaptation for the screen, or did you feel like one was stronger than the other?
Oh, man, I got poisoned, right? You cannot watch the television show and then go to the book. I just don't think it flows right anymore. You can go from the book,
Ah,
you can go from the book to the other, the incarnation. If you read the book, you can watch the TV show or watch the
uh-huh,
movie.
uh-huh,
But
uh-huh.
I mean, it's never going to be good enough.
I
And
hear
you're
you.
already
See?
starting with a crappier version. So
Yeah,
you go into the book with
yeah.
the crappier version in mind, and I think it just destroys the whole experience of reading it. And again, you could
Interesting.
study it for educational purposes, but you're never going to have that deep emotional connection, I think, unless it just really goes above and beyond. What's it called? The uh, uh, Song of Fire and Ice.
Oh, uh-huh.
Are you familiar with
Um,
that? Obviously,
yeah,
Game of Thrones is the
yeah. No,
HBO adaptation. I saw the first couple seasons of that and then read the books and got
oh,
sucked in. So there's obviously differences. What did you think?
I
Being
haven't I
Go
haven't
ahead.
read the book. I did see the
No.
series,
What'd you think of
and
the series?
yeah, it was pretty good. I was a little disappointed, but there was a lot of strength to it.
Yeah.
I felt the strongest points were kind of like they reminded me of Larry Niven, his hard science fiction set within the solar system, and
Uh,
the whole idea of the Belters and their different culture and everything, and the idea of a kind of a noir detective thing was pretty well done. I like that part.
it kind of harkens back to what you were dealing with, or what we were already talking about,
Exactly,
right?
exactly
Except
right,
they have more technology, which,
right,
give it 100 years, and we're going to look just as stupid as our ancestors did 100 years ago, right?
exactly right,
We're going to be totally
exactly right.
embarrassed. Now we think we're top dogs. We don't know
Yeah,
shit.
that's right.
We're the
Yeah.
smartest. I love that scene from was it Star Trek 4, the voyage home, where they're going to drill a hole and he's like barbarians, Dr. McCoy. It's like that was my first taste of how stupid potentially we are right now. What I mean,
Oh yeah,
I
I know
listened
exactly
to
what you're talking about. Yeah, when they were in the 20th century
Elevator.
hospital,
Yeah.
and yeah, McCoy was kind of shaking with horror and rage at the barbarity of the high-tech stuff that they were talking about. Yeah.
I don't know, man. I never aimed when I went to the library. I mean, I've mentioned before on this podcast that my mom worked at a library and I had free run. I didn't have to, or free reign. I'd be able to take whatever I want out without going past the checkout counter. So it was basically a kid in a candy store. So I never had the opportunity to go into a bookstore. So they set up things differently in libraries. You know what I mean? Everything's
Oh,
alphabetized
sure.
then by the Dewey Decimal
Yeah.
System. So
Yeah.
you can go by subject, but never by genre. So I'm all over the place by the spines of the book, not the cover even, just by the names. Does this look interesting? Everything's a cover and a title, or a spine and a title. So I never really got into that stuff. I mean, I love Star Trek. Star Trek was my big science fiction thing as a kid. Right? I mean, are you one of those people that can choose between Star Trek and Star Wars, or are you just all about the?
Well, yeah. I mean, I do. I guess I would prefer Star Trek more than Star Wars, but the first Star Wars film was just such a great, man. That thing,
Yeah,
and
classic.
again, like we're saying, it's really a mashup. It's a
Mhm.
mashup of samurai movie and western and and the old kind of Flash Gordon serials,
Same thing
and
as Harry Potter, though, too. It's a mashup as well.
it was so fresh
People
and
want to feel a connection, don't they? Want to feel close to something, but they own it.
but it's also, and just the sense of adventure and excitement and I don't know, it was just really, it was really, and so that's completely different from, a Starship Enterprise going around doing its mission. I mean, it's a separate thing, but just great stuff, great stuff.
So the first movie alone, the sequels and prequels don't do it for you.
Well, the first movie was the strongest, and then I mean, Empire Strikes Back is pretty good, but then yeah, when you get to the third one, it's starting to weaken out,
It's
and then
pulled
the
along by your
prequels.
love of the first one, isn't it? I mean, that's why everybody goes to these movies, and
Yeah,
they leave
well,
a bad taste in your mouth.
and then the series, the TV series of Firefly, I thought really captured that initial. Um, it's kind of like we've got this Millennium Falcon. We're just going to kind of go around and try to make a buck, either legally or illegally.
Yeah,
So Firefly really, for me, really captured that the potential of the first Star Wars movie, and so I really do love the Firefly franchise, and
it was
it's
dirty,
too.
right? It was greasy.
Yeah.
You could
Yep.
sense the mechanics behind it. The
Yep.
characters had purpose behind them. They had skills. They had specialties. I
Yeah.
like it. I mean, there was religion too, and mixed in there, and you can't have a universe without religion. In a way, I mean, it
Yeah.
just makes it
Yeah.
more real. People want
Actually, you're
religion, want
right.
to worship
You're
something,
right. Exactly right. In fact, that's kind of, you're right. Good point. It's kind of daring to include that, but it worked really well. That's right.
right? And I mean, that character, God, I love that actor too. He just died a few years ago.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, Abe Vigoda died. He died just right afterward, as I was watching Bernie Miller for the first time all the way through.
Oh.
It was a great show too. It's a great, great actor. What was his name? Malcolm Gladwell is the only thing that's coming to mind, but I think he's a columnist.
Yeah.
Malcolm something. Yeah, it doesn't matter. But yeah, man, I love you add that religious aspect to it, just opens it up to mystery, doesn't it? It just opens
Yeah.
it up to kind of like, okay, maybe there is something more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe you have some peanut butter on your chocolate. I like that. I mean, we don't even know, right? I mean, that's what I love about science fiction because you don't even know. You can add that mystique into it. Einstein allowed you to when he said what I don't even know what he said. Everything he said has basically been speculative enough to it's been fictionalized, basically, right?
Yeah, that's
But he,
true.
he he talks about multiple realities, right? And the multiverse. If you dig enough, he didn't say shit about a multiverse. Somebody else did. It was probably a science fiction author. But anyway, I mean, let's just attribute it to Einstein. He gave us the multiverse, and that just layers everything, doesn't it? Anything could happen.
Oh
There's
yeah,
an
yeah.
infinity of possibilities out there to play with. And some of those included God, and some of those don't include anything. And you could be in any of those. That's what I love about science fiction and fantasy. You can blend them as much as you want. They can't. unfortunately, be separated too much because technology in itself is a magic.
Right, right. And there are certain things that, well, like back to that scene that we're talking about from the hospital, 20th century hospital, where they're in the elevator and the doctors are just spouting off the latest cutting edge medical technology. And, Dr. McCoy is there just shaking his head because it's
Scoffs.
like, and just saying, this is so medieval. In other words, what there are things that we think of that are going to be the next whatever, and many of them might be, but a lot of things that'll change, we might not even have a hint about.
I love
So
it when we play time traveler in our fiction. And, they do consider historical fiction an element of speculative fiction, right? Because it's all speculative, especially when you make up a character and let them be in a world, whether it existed 10 years ago or 300 or never, it's
right.
all kind of speculative. But I love when they go back in time. What was that show called? Just recently, the Nick, the Nick, something like that. It was a hospital in New York in the turn of the century, and they showed
Huh.
surgeries and stuff like that. I think it was called the Nick.
Wow.
But I love it, right? I mean, that's what they did. We're basically the time travelers in that case. We're the Dr. McCoys going back in time, watching them massacre people. I mean, basically, the first scene of this is a woman going in for a cesarean section at the turn of the century, and this doctor, wizened doctor, stands up and goes, "We're going to be doing a cesarean section, and the attempt will be to have a minimal loss of blood." And he dives the scalpel into this woman's abdomen, and blood showers everywhere. They're they're striving to stop it. Like, you could tell it's wrong. Something has gone completely backwards. The woman dies. The
Oh
next
dear.
scene is the doctor in his study, and he blows his brains out. I mean, this is a television show on AMC or
Wow.
some bullshit like that. But I mean, that's what we've done, right? We've gone back in time. We can see this from the perspective of that doctor now. My God, you murdered that woman by
Yeah,
not knowing
yeah.
what the hell you were doing. But thank God you learned by murdering that woman, because now my wife can have a cesarean section and she doesn't die. So
Yay.
thank you, Nick, or whatever. Thanks for murdering that woman. I guess barbarian taught us everything that we shouldn't do. Um, this has been a great conversation. We're at an hour, actually, just about a little bit over an hour now. Was there anything that you think that we neglected to mention that you wanted to add, or that I cut you off so badly that you're not able to go back to?
No, no, I don't think so. I mean, it's pretty much up to you. And I didn't have any additional thing that I wanted to say. I mean, just like you already got into we talked about how at this point I'm just doing a big publicity push. So, and aside from that, just talking about, yeah, the mysterious origins of the creative process. And each story has its own little thing.
Right.
I mean, you had a weird little idea, or you think, well, what if the French Revolution were more like this, or what if, if we translate this thing that happened back then into more modern times, what would it look like? And just sometimes it's like that. Sometimes, like you're saying, I would when you wake up and start writing, that reminded me, a lot of authors have that technique where they do want to be coming straight up out of the dream state, and there's a lot of strength to that. So it just made me think
Oh
about, like,
man, I can't write any other way. I get so mad.
exactly.
If I
So
wake
there's
up and
that.
I interact with my wife and my children, walk the dog, then come home after like 45 minutes, might be an hour and a half of, prancing around being dad and husband and dog owner for whatever. I get downstairs, they're thumping upstairs or whatever, they're awake. I can't write. It just doesn't happen. But if I wake up at
Right,
2 o'clock in the morning, and write for
right,
6 hours straight and everybody's awake
right,
at 8, I'm
right.
dead tired and I hate everything. I'm in a
Uh-huh.
lot better mood for some reason.
There
Right?
you
I
go.
mean, I hate everything because I'm so exhausted, but I'm happy
Good, good. So
because I
that
produce.
shows that you're already tapping into that dream state. You're coming
Yeah.
fresh up out of it, and you're just working it out, and going on like that. And yeah,
When is your golden hour?
oh, my schedule. I usually do it. Yeah, usually around like 9 or 10 in the morning.
Oh yeah.
So I'm not the one to go, not the person to do it straight from waking up. But like I say, I know from reading about other people that there's some famous names that would do that exact technique. Um, so
Well, I
it's
definitely don't
pretty
want to be
neat.
famous. I just want like 20,000 people to give me like $20 every year.
That sounds very reasonable.
Reasonable, right? And I'm good. I'm good. Doesn't even sound like a lot. You could do it like every other month. $5 is fine. I don't care.
That's right. That's right.
What a world, though, man. We do live like that. I mean, like you said earlier, it's so hard to decide which way things are going to go. You know what I mean? You're a surfer on the water waiting for your wave that turned out
Yeah.
to be complete bullshit. But
Yeah,
I
that's
guess,
right.
you know, if you're a surfer, you know which waves are going to be bunk and which ones are going to be good. I think, right? I don't know. I grew up in Florida on the Gulf Coast. We didn't have waves. We had
Okay.
shrimp and crab traps. That's all I knew as a kid. And grunt fish. It's all I caught from the bay. Where do you live? You live out west.
Yeah, I live out by Berkeley.
Oh,
So
San
that's,
Francisco.
yeah, San Francisco Bay Area. Yeah.
Wow. I would love to live. I've been there a few times. It's beautiful. I love San Francisco.
Oh, thank you.
I live in New York. Can you be jealous for a second?
Well, it's
No.
the beating. It's
Don't
the
humor me. I
beating.
don't want to hear it.
No, no, it's the beating heart of the whole. Boy, man, that place
Yeah.
never sleeps, and there's just so much creativity just flowing.
Used to
And
be,
I
man.
mean,
I don't know what's happened in the city, honestly. It just seems to be too corporate now. It's so hard. I mean, things are so expensive. I mean, you know, you live there and you're the most expensive city in the country. But I mean, to have good art, you have to have poor people. They seem to have all gone away.
oh, interesting. Yeah.
Once you become rich, you stop becoming an artist. I don't know. I'm looking forward to that day. I'll let you know whether or not I'm still an
Yeah, that's
artist.
right. That's right. You be sure to call
If
again.
it ever happens, I will send you an email. Hey, no longer an artist. That is true.
You'll say, "Hey, yeah, I'm
But
fulfilling that
people will
promise."
buy whatever I sell them because I am no whatever. It
Exactly
does
right.
become easier though, doesn't it, man? If you look at a lot of these guys, and I have been doing a little bit of a study on all the old science fiction people, they have like their hits in the very beginning. You know, they write their best work and then all of a sudden they're mailing it in. Like Jules Verne wrote
Yeah,
every classic he had in the first 10 years of his literary career, and
yeah,
then he wrote 60 years of something else,
yeah.
you know?
That's right. Yeah, that's true. That's
H.G.
true.
Wells, same thing. Time Machine was his first book or something. And then,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it's very interesting. Stephen King's the same. Is he writing good stuff? Or did he write his best stuff before? I mean, it was good. Shawshank was good. There were some good books that came out in the 80s. And then he had his accident, and his best book was on writing. Since,
Interesting.
right?
Yeah, interesting point. Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
I mean, I've read a few. Gurney Key was very intriguing, but Stephen King can't finish a novel. 1969, 1963, what was it called? November
Oh, yeah,
21st.
yeah, that
That
one.
was really
Yeah.
interesting, and I did finish that. But I mean, it had an ending already, right? You have to keep JFK
There you
alive.
go.
You know what
That's
happens. It's pretty
so
easy. He
maybe
didn't have to come up with
that
anything.
was his strategy on that particular one, where you're gonna definitely work
You
to an
just kind of
end
have to put your
point.
imagination to work for a second, and you're good. No, I do. I really like Stephen King. I think he has a place in literary history, right up there with a lot of the greats. Um, but I wonder, did he do his best work in the beginning, or is he doing his best work now?
Yeah. In fact, wasn't that another line from Star Trek 4 when they were on the bus and Kirk and Spock are talking and they start talking about Stephen King and they say, yeah, he was the Charles Dickens of his time. Isn't that what they said?
I don't remember. Is
I'm
that
pretty
something that
sure.
was? I could see that. Is he the Charles Dickens of our time? He is the Charles Dickens of our time. I mean,
And
Charles
so
Dickens
there you
kind of
go.
serialized everything, same as
Yeah,
what's
that's
his
right.
face over there in Jules Verne. He did the same thing.
Yeah, that's
You know, they're writing at the same time. But I mean, this guy writes what 4 or 5 novels a year.
right.
Is that a good thing? Was Charles Dickens a good thing? I mean, he's writing for the newspaper. It's funny how history kind of cleans up a little bit,
That's true.
right? I mean,
That's
Hugh
true.
Howey lives on a catamaran touring the world. And he's an indie hybrid dude. So I mean, I guess there's no permanent stain of any kind. You can become successful if you write a good enough story. Speaking of stories, what are you reading right now? What do you have in your Kindle or on your night table that you like to point people towards?
Well, let's see. What I'm reading right now is a book of very short stories by an obscure author. So it's kind of a weird thing. It's a physical book. I got it through the library, through an interlibrary loan. It's called Evangelical Cockroach.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I like
And
the name. I like the title so much. What's it about?
well, like I say, they're very short stories. And this guy, his name is Woodford, and so I'd been reading. He did a couple of books about writing that I thought were pretty interesting, and this is a guy from earlier on. So yeah, he's writing in that early 20th century period, and so these are a collection. He also wrote a lot of novels, but I haven't read any of those. This is my first chance. Like I say, after having read a book or two of his about the process of writing, which are pretty funny, they're interesting, and I decided, well, I want to see what his output is actually like. So I'm reading that, and that's pretty neat.
What do you
And the other
think?
book,
Can the teacher write, or can the writer teach?
they're very short stories, so they're kind of like in the O. Henry mode of like there's very so they're like miniatures, and
It's so incredibly difficult. I write flashes all the time. I can't get them
yeah,
published, but I write
yeah,
flashes all the time.
yeah. So maybe for that it might be especially good for you. I think it's pretty neat. He's definitely um, doing what he was talking about. So I'm happy for that. Each story, I mean, they're so short. Some of them I think are good. Some are just not so much. But it's interesting to see in that form. But I'm not done with it.
Yeah.
Maybe my opinion will change.
It's
I'm
interesting though,
about
right? Because how do you consume stuff like that? Because you can read one of those pieces in less than a minute, typically. And
yeah,
do you go on to the
exactly.
next one, or do you sit there and digest those? How many words are we talking? 50, 200?
Precisely, precisely,
Yeah.
because what we're saying is, and the original context that they were published, they were just short pieces in a newspaper or whatever. So, in other words, exactly, they weren't designed to be eaten like potato chips.
Yeah.
They were just a little thing. So I hear you, and I do tend to just read one and then put the book down because otherwise it just becomes a weird a sequence like that. So exactly right. I tend to just read one and put it down and then go look at something else. The other thing I'm reading is I'm about halfway through at the history. So it's Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which is a
Wow.
huge thing. And I'm
Where
now
are
at
you?
about the halfway point.
Which is
Well, at this point,
800? Are you talking about
well,
halfway point to the collapse, or
no, at this point it's I just got through so now it's kind of shifted over to the Byzantine Empire because the Western Empire has fallen to the
are you are about at
barbarians.
half? You're right, where Constantine takes over
Yeah,
Christianity or
actually
accepts
further than
Christianity.
that, it's Belisarius has already come along and done his incredible military genius and
So interesting.
retaken all this stuff only to be given the backstab from the emperor that he was loyal to. So
What
that's
an
a
incredible, interesting time, right? I mean, in
yeah.
terms of writing speculative fiction, and obviously you're reading history, but there's so much to play with. I just happened upon, and this fits right into what you just said, Saint Olga, Olga, is a Russian saint. She was uh, canonized in like 900 AD or something along those lines, and she was a brutal freaking woman before she took Christ into her heart or whatever the hell the term was at
Wow.
that time. She boiled people alive. I mean, she was brutal, brutal, brutal,
Wow.
brutal.
Wow.
I mean, what a time, right? I mean, these were our ancestors were violent people.
Oh
So
yeah.
incredibly violent.
Oh yeah.
The things that we've done to each other. I mean, honestly, sometimes it's a nightmare what you can do with your imagination. Just sit back and just think about what we've done, not just to, I mean, to ourselves, basically.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
In the name of skin color or whatever have you, it's like,
Sure.
it's just really horrible to think. They don't even realize they're doing it. Going back
Yeah.
to Hitler, you know what I mean? It's like the dude
Yeah.
didn't even realize he was hurting just life in general, just killing himself, basically. I
Yeah, yeah.
don't know where that kind
Well,
of
and
stupidity.
there's like listening to a podcast. Like I like to listen to this podcast called Eastern Border.
Oh,
It's by a guy out there in Latvia,
oh,
and a young guy, and he's talking about what life was under the Soviet Union,
interesting.
and he's been doing a series on Lenin, and now he's working on a series on Stalin, and it's just really a trip to hear him, and he, you know, he does the research and he's investigating stuff and he's getting all these death threats from Russia and stuff, like
Wow.
right
Wow.
now.
Well, I mean,
So
interesting, right? Trump said something today about Germany being Russia's slave. Everybody's accusing us of being Russia's slave. I mean, Russia is incredibly powerful with oil right now, and it doesn't seem like they're not bowing down to anybody.
yeah,
It's an
yeah,
incredibly
it's
interesting
a
time to be alive.
it
I have
is
had
it
such a
is
great opportunity to talk to people who've come from behind that iron curtain too on this podcast, and it's kind of like they tell me they grew up before 1989, and it was like, oh wait, what a interesting situation to come from that to this. Tell me about
Absolutely.
it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, the Discovery is amazing. It's too bad a lot of their stuff is gone, right? And they lost a lot of their culture before that wall came down. Or they didn't have any
right.
to begin with, or something. I'm really surprised. What was his name? Lem, the guy, the Polish dude.
Yeah, Lem, Stanislaw Lem.
I mean, that stuff filtered through somehow.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
shouldn't have. I mean, but it did. He was popular before the wall came down. Somehow.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. And recently I read there's a book of his letters to his translator. So now we get back into the difficulty of translators and translation.
Hmm.
So he wrote letters to his American translator, and they came out with this book of that. And it was interesting to see how Lem, how driven he was, how ambitious he was, and how disappointed he was by science fiction genre, and he was trying to move beyond it, and he was really hoping to get like a Nobel Prize for literature, you know. So that's
Wow.
interesting to
Did
see that kind of.
anybody on the Eastern Bloc win the Nobel Prize for Literature from 1945 to 1989?
That's a good question, but he definitely was aiming for that, and that was part of his disappointment and everything, and maybe in order to achieve that was another reason why he was trying to shed his genre
Oh my God, that is
aspect.
so fascinating. You're totally right. I bet that was influenced by the Soviet Union attempting to get that dude a Pulitzer. I bet that's why we know about him.
Yeah, yeah,
They wanted that prize. They wanted
yeah,
that prize.
exactly right.
That's
And
very
they
interesting.
felt like, in fact, that's the thing is, as I'm reading the letter now, this is, you know, published in the book. It's a collection of his letters, but as I'm reading it, he does seem to be saying, Lamb himself seems to be saying, it's just another racket like everything else. So where's my prize, kind of a thing, like.
Yeah, you don't have your
And it's
prize
like,
because you're in the Soviet Union, buddy. I mean, honestly,
it's very
Nobel,
interesting.
right? It comes from Sweden, doesn't it, or Norway?
Yeah,
Oslo?
Sweden.
Which one?
Yeah.
Sweden. Um, they hate Russia. They hate the Soviet Union. They threatened them. They went to war with them, or didn't they? Or they run over Finland and stopped there. I think they went to war against Sweden,
In any
unfortunately.
event, just the complexities of, like we're saying,
Yeah,
the author who has
politics.
ambitions, and wants to, he started off in genre, but then he's trying to move outside of it,
Hmm.
and you know, just all the complexities of, you know, his own disappointments at things, and
The whole idea of genre is very stodgy anyway.
that's
You know what
true.
I mean? It's like you write good stuff, Why is it good? People like reading it. That should be all it is. It's capturing kind of the moment in time that you're writing in, and people are able to kind of navigate through it and enjoy it. People like you who are able to go back in time and read the old people, I mean, unfortunately, you're not really helping them become successful because nobody now is probably going to read them, right? But you're
Right, right.
hoping that you can use your knowledge to write a compelling narrative. I hope you can too, man, because I really like that stuff. I like the idea behind it. Can't remember
Thank
who I
you.
read, but that Sputnik era of science fiction when I was a kid, there was these serials. You know, this kid was writing, solving scientific problems. I can't remember what it was, but one of them was about Sputnik, and it just was really an interesting kind of dynamic science fiction,
Uh-huh.
fantasy, the future, space travel. How does it mix together in a world that doesn't have the words to necessarily describe it accurately? You know what I mean? It's just,
Right,
it's really
right,
fascinating.
right.
And like I already said, really appreciate you being here and talking with me. And my last question for you would be, where can we find you on the World Wide Web so other people can interact with you, hopefully?
Well, right, like you say, you found my the web page for the serious fiction. So there's that, and I'm trying to get more of a
What is it?
presence of.
Sirius, right? How did you
Mm-hmm,
spell it?
that's
Okay,
right. And then right, and then and then I'm trying to develop more of a presence over there on Goodreads. So
Goodreads. How are you doing that?
yeah, well,
Just
I
reading,
just
you're just writing reviews for what you read or interacting with people?
right. Well, yeah. I mean, people have already been reviewing my previous reference books and stuff, so
Oh,
it's weird to,
fantastic.
yeah. So it's another weird case of other people have already set the table for me, and now I'm finally belatedly coming to the party, sort of thing.
That
So
had to have been an interesting experience. Did you discover Goodreads and then discover that you had kind of like a fandom? Or did you discover your fandom and then Goodreads through it?
yeah, it's a plate of spaghetti like that. Like I'm not really
Right? It's
sure.
all intertwined and messy.
It's all kind of intertwined. Yeah, yeah. So so
That's really
yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah.
So are you, I mean, do you have a community? Do you interact with them daily, weekly, monthly, or just occasionally?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm kind of doing that. I used to be more active on like there's a Gene Wolfe, uh, internet discussion group, but I did
Reddit by chance?
no, 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 not Reddit, no.
Is there one on
But
there? I would imagine it would
anyway,
be.
I used to be more a part of that, and they actually they sparked a lot of stuff because they liked my earlier thing, and then I did another book, and they contributed a lot to it, and so there was a lot of discussion and stuff there on the reference side. But
Yeah.
but I haven't done that in a while, so I haven't really been uh, very much active on that kind of thing in a while. But like I say, this Goodreads thing that seems to be the best place to find me, and yeah, it looks like that.
Next reference book you write, just slap a short fiction story in the very beginning of it somewhere.
You know what? I think, yeah, I like the way you think that I should do some kind of a reference book that blends the some science, some stories and
Oh
some
my God, dude.
articles.
What if you did a collection of stories just like yours? What if you
Yeah,
did, I don't know
right,
what
right,
genre this is necessarily.
right,
Did we even,
right,
did
right.
you say what it was? But if you did a whole bunch of people like you,
Yeah,
include you in it, and then
yeah,
have your
that's right.
reference material kind of
There you go.
interspaced through the
Exactly right,
anthology, what a great
right.
idea. I gave it to you, so now my name goes on it. So,
That's fair. That's fair.
and the rest of your novels co-authored by me as well. So I think, oh, okay, you don't have to co-author it. I don't have to, my name doesn't have to be on it, but I do think that's a very great idea to build a community of people that like the same kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, we're
yeah,
stronger together than we are apart. And I think
exactly
that's
right.
ultimately what I've learned over this last year. And man, it's really enjoy talking to cool people that like cool stuff.
Very good.
Excellent, my friend. And enjoy the fog tonight, which I'm sure will be rolling in any time now.
Yes, thank you.